The chandelier light spilled softly across the hotel ballroom, catching the edges of white orchids arranged in tall glass vases. The air smelled faintly of citrus and wax, and a saxophone's low hum wove through the chatter of 65 guests. I sat at the head table, my navy silk dress brushing against the starched linen of the chair. My silver hair, pinned neatly, gleamed under the glow, and I could feel eyes on me, neighbors, old colleagues, distant cousins, all wondering what kind of mother I was, what kind of life I'd built. My name is Nancy Wheeler, and at 64 I've learned to sit still when the world expects me to flinch. Charlotte Lottie, as she insisted everyone call her, stood up, her champagne flute catching the light like a shard of ice. Her dress, a shimmering cream that hugged her frame, looked more like a wedding gown than something meant for an engagement party. She tapped her glass with a silver spoon, the ping sharp enough to hush the room. Even the servers froze, trays balanced in mid-step. "I have something to say," Lottie announced, her voice clear, almost theatrical, carrying over the saxophone's fade. My son, Paul, sat beside her, his fork halfway to his mouth with a piece of salmon. He didn't look up, didn't catch her tone, as if this were just another evening, not the night his fiancée would unravel everything. "I've held this in long enough," she said, turning her gaze to me. Her eyes were sharp, like she'd been sharpening them for months. "Nancy, you've been a burden since day one." A gasp rippled through the tables. Mrs. Larson from the library, where I used to work as a nurse, clutched her napkin. Mr. Jenkins, who sold us vegetables every Saturday, widened his eyes. I didn't move, didn't blink. My hands stayed folded in my lap, steady as stone. "I can't keep pretending," Lottie continued, her voice rising, a performer feeding off the crowd's shock. "You've lived in that house too long, Nancy, cluttering it with your old dishes, your creaky footsteps, your presence. After the wedding, we need that house for us, for our family, our future. It's time you stepped aside." The room went quiet, the kind of silence that feels like a held breath. Paul wiped his mouth with his napkin, still staring at his plate. No one stood, no one spoke. A few guests glanced away, suddenly fascinated by their wine glasses. Lottie laughed, a short, brittle sound, like she was telling a story about a stranger, not her future mother-in-law. "She shuffles around in that house like it's hers forever," she said, gesturing at me like I was a piece of furniture that didn't match her vision. "It's like living with a shadow that won't leave." I looked at her, my eyes steady, the way you watch a storm cloud gathering on the horizon. I could feel the weight of her words, each one meant to cut, to shame, to push me out. But I've faced worse than a young woman's cruelty. I've held hands that went still, heard machines beep their final notes. I've survived loss that cracks you open. So I sat there, unmoved. She wanted a reaction, tears, anger, something to prove she'd won. But I've learned that silence can be louder than any scream. I let the moment stretch, the saxophone's last note lingering in the air. Then, slowly, I smiled. A small, careful smile, the kind that holds a secret. I raised my hand, just enough, and nodded to the event manager standing near the sound booth. He nodded back. They had no idea I'd been preparing for this night for weeks. Lottie thought she was writing the end of my story, but I was holding the pen. And in that moment, with every eye in the room on me, I wasn't just a mother, or a widow, or a woman past her prime. I was something else entirely, someone who refused to be erased. 7 years ago. The house was quiet, but it was a gentle kind of quiet, the kind that settles after a life well lived. My husband, Henry, left me on a rainy October morning. A stroke took him before the ambulance could weave through the wet streets of our little Midwestern town. I was holding his hand when his fingers stopped curling around mine. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic, and the nurse's footsteps faded as she stepped out to give us a moment. By the time she returned, he was gone. I wore black for 3 months, then gray for another 2. Neighbors brought casseroles. Church friends offered soft words, but it was Paul who brought the house back to life. Every Sunday, like clockwork, he'd show up at the front door with a paper bag of waffles and a thermos of coffee. We'd sit in the dining room, where the morning light spilled through the window, painting the old oak table gold. The china cabinet, filled with Henry's mother's dishes, caught the glow, and for a moment, it felt like he was still there. Just in the next room, Paul would talk about his job at the warehouse, the way trucks got delayed in snow, or the odd customers who argued over delivery times. "You're not alone, Mom," he he said once, his hand resting over mine, warm and steady. Dad made me promise to look after you, and I always will. His voice had that same quiet certainty Henry used to have, like the words were already carved in stone. I believed him. Maybe because I needed to. Maybe because it felt like the only thing keeping the walls from closing in. When Paul lost his job 2 years later, the warehouse cutting staff after a merger, he came to me, his shoulders slumped. It's just temporary, he said, his voice tight with embarrassment. Until I get back on my feet. I didn't hesitate. I told him the spare room was his, the fridge was his, the house was his, always had been. He nodded, his eyes avoiding mine, and moved in the next week. For a while, it felt like a gift. We'd spend evenings watching Henry's old black and white movies, the ones he'd quote by heart. We'd make coffee in the dented pot Henry refused to replace, laughing about how he'd called it lucky. Paul fixed the sagging porch rail, painted it white to match the trim. He helped me tend the hydrangea bushes in the backyard, the ones Henry planted the year we moved in. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours, a rhythm that felt like home. Then, Lottie came along. Paul met her at a work conference, where she was pitching event marketing ideas to a room full of suits. She was 34, sharp as a tack, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The first time Paul brought her to the house, I noticed how she hovered near the doorway, her heels clicking on the hardwood like she was afraid to step too far in. It's cozy, she said, her eyes scanning the dining room, lingering on the china cabinet, the faded curtains, the framed photos of Paul as a boy, like a time capsule. Paul laughed it off. She's used to modern places, Mom. She means well. I nodded, but something in my chest tightened, like a thread pulled to taut. After that, the waffles stopped coming on Sundays. Paul didn't fix things around the house anymore. Instead, he started suggesting changes. New curtains, he'd say, less clutter. Lottie thinks the dining room feels heavy, he told me. One evening, as if her opinion was now the house's blueprint, that it started small. He complained my cooking was too bland, that I should use less salt for my heart. He said my footsteps on the hardwood were too loud in the morning, that my sweaters looked tired when we had guests. Little by little, he stopped sitting with me in the dining room, stopped asking how I slept, stopped seeing me. It was like I was fading into the wallpaper, a ghost in my own home. I tried to brush it off. Paul was in love, I told myself. He was building a life, and Lottie was part of it. But every time she came over, her smile was a little tighter, her comments a little sharper. You must get tired of keeping up this big house, she'd say, her voice sweet but pointed, like a needle wrapped in silk. It's a lot for someone your age. I'd nod, smile, keep my hands busy with a dish or a dustcloth. But inside, I was counting the ways the house was changing. The photos on the mantel disappeared one by one. The hydrangeas went on. Paul started repeating Lottie's words like they were his own, her phrases slipping into his mouth like scripture. Lottie says we should update the kitchen. Lottie says the furniture's outdated. I didn't know then how far it would go. I didn't know they were planning to take everything, not just the house, but the life I'd built, the memories I'd kept safe. But I was about to find out. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind where the air feels heavy with the promise of rain. I was in Paul's room, gathering laundry from the basket by his closet. The house was quiet, except for the faint creak of the floorboards under my feet. Paul was out, managing a delivery at the warehouse, or so he'd said. I figured I'd tidy up, fold his shirts, maybe dust the shelves, old habits from my years as a nurse, keeping things in order, even when the world felt like it was slipping. That as I reached for a stray sock under the bed, my fingers brushed against something cold and hard. I paused, crouched down, and pulled out a small tin box, the kind Henry used to keep his fishing lures in. It was scratched, the edges dented, with his initials HW etched faintly on the lid. My heart caught for a moment, like it always did when I stumbled across a piece of him, but curiosity tugged harder than memory. I opened it. Inside, there was no fishing line, no hooks, just papers, neatly folded, and a USB drive tucked into a corner. The top document had my name in bold, Nancy Wheeler. Next to it, words like home equity loan and collateral stared back at me. My hands went cold. It was a loan agreement for $55,000, dated 4 months ago, with my signature at the bottom. Only I'd never signed it, never even seen it. I sat on the edge of Paul's bed, the tin box open in my lap, my breath shallow. I flipped through the pages, copies of my tax returns, a scan of my driver's license, a photo of our house, taken from the street, with scribbled notes on the back, appraised at $320,000, minimal updates needed for sale. My stomach twisted, like I'd swallowed something sharp. Then, I found the email, printed and folded tightly, as if it could hide its own weight. It was from Lottie to Paul, dated 2 months ago. Her words were precise, like she'd written them with a ruler. Paul, my parents are on board. After the wedding, we move her out. I've found a care facility, nothing fancy, just enough supervision. We can sell the house and most of the furniture to cover the first few months. Don't feel bad. It's the cleanest way to handle this. The bottom. She'd drawn a small star in blue ink, like a child signing a birthday card. I stared at it, my pulse thudding in my ears. I thought that was the worst of it, that the betrayal couldn't cut any deeper. But then I saw the USB drive, its black plastic glinting like a warning. I took it to my old laptop in the dining room, the one I used for recipes and emails. My hands shook as I plugged it in. The first file opened mid-conversation. My voice, clear as day. I've got about $6,000 tucked away in the dresser. Paul, for emergencies, you know, or if something happens to me. Paul's voice followed, casual, almost bored. Smart mom, don't worry, it's safe with me. I hit pause. My chest felt like it was caving in. He'd recorded me, in my own house, in the dining room, where we used to laugh over waffles. Every word I'd said, every trust I'd given, turned into ammunition. I scrolled through the files, dozens of them, labeled by date, conversations about my savings, my health, my routines. They weren't just planning to take my home, they were cataloging my life to make it easier. But there was more. Tucked in the same folder was a scanned document, a legal notice I almost overlooked. It was a court filing from 3 years ago, naming Charlotte Hayes as a defendant in a fraud case. She'd been sued for falsifying expenses on a marketing campaign, pocketing thousands from a client. The case was settled quietly, but she'd been fired, her reputation barely salvaged. Lottie, with her perfect smile and polished pitches, had a past she'd buried deep. I closed the laptop, the tin box still open beside me. My hands were steady now, but my heart was racing, trying to keep up with the truth. This wasn't just about losing my home. It was about losing my son, or the boy I thought he was. They were planning to erase me, to pack me away like one of Henry's old fishing rods. I sat there until the light through the window turned gray. The threat of rain, now a soft patter on the roof. I thought about calling Paul, confronting him right then, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the nurse in me, the part that knew you don't stitch a wound until you've cleaned it. I needed to be sure. I needed to be smart. The next morning, I pulled out the old address book Henry kept in the kitchen drawer. Vincent Porter's number was still there, written in his careful handwriting. Vince was our family lawyer, the one who'd helped us buy the house, draft our wills, plan our lives. I hadn't spoken to him since Henry's funeral, but his voice was the same, gruff, steady, like a lighthouse in a storm. Vince, I said, my throat tight but my words clear. It's Nancy Wheeler. I need your help. It's urgent. We met 2 days later in his office, a small room above the town's only bookstore. I handed him the tin box, the papers, the USB drive. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I just said, they're trying to take everything. I won't let them. Vince adjusted his glasses, his face heavy as he read. When he looked up, his eyes met mine. We can stop this, Nancy, he said, but it'll take time and care. I don't want revenge, I told him. I want my life back. And that's when I knew. I wasn't just fighting for my house, I was fighting for the woman I'd always been, the one who'd held Henry's hand until the end, who'd raised a son with love, who'd earned every inch of her place in this world. They thought they could erase me. But I was about to show them I was still here. The morning after I found the tin box, I sat at the kitchen table, my coffee gone cold in its chipped mug. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like it's holding its breath. I smoothed the edge of a napkin with my fingers, over and over, trying to steady the storm inside me. Paul had left for work at the warehouse, his truck rumbling out of the driveway before dawn. I waited until I was sure he was gone, then reached for the phone. Vince Porter's office hadn't changed in years. It still smelled of old books and leather, with a single window overlooking the town's bookstore. I carried the tin box under my arm, its weight heavier than it should have been. Vince, 70 now, his hair more silver than mine, took the box without a word. He read every page, listened to the USB recordings through an old pair of headphones, his face growing heavier with each passing minute. When he finished, he set his glasses down and looked at me. "Nancy," he said, his voice low, like he was carrying the same hurt I was. "This is fraud. Forged signatures, recorded conversations without consent. It's enough to build a case." "I don't want to fight," I said, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. "I want protection. I want to make sure they can't take what's mine." Vince nodded, his eyes sharp with understanding. "We'll start with the will," he said, "and we'll need evidence more than what you've got here." That afternoon, we rewrote my will. Paul's name was removed, every line of it erased like it had never been there. Every dollar, every piece of furniture, every square inch of the house Henry and I had built it, all went to a charity for children with autism. One Henry used to slip $20 bills to every Christmas. It felt right, clean, like washing a wound. I didn't want revenge. I wanted to take back the story they thought they could write for me. Vince handed me a small package before I left his office. Inside were 2 tiny audio recorders, no bigger than a key fob, and a manual that looked older than I was. "Hide them where they talk the most," he said. "Label everything. Keep it organized." I nodded, tucking the package into my purse. I'd spent years as a nurse, keeping charts, tracking details. I could do this. Back home, I placed one recorder inside a ceramic flower vase on the dining room table, where Paul and Lottie liked to sit after dinner. The other went behind a stack of Henry's old medical journals on the bookshelf. Every night, I'd retrieve them, label the files by date, and listen. They made it easy. They talked freely when they thought I was asleep, their voices sharp through the static. "We'll sell the house by spring," Lottie said one evening, her tone as casual as if she were planning a vacation. "The furniture's worth at least 10 grand. The antiques will cover the care home deposit." Paul's voice was softer, hesitant. "You sure she won't notice the loan?" "She doesn't check her mail," Lottie replied, laughing. "She's too busy dusting her relics." I sat in my bedroom, headphones on, my hands clenched so tight my knuckles ached. But I didn't cry. I wrote down every word, every date, every detail. I was building something stronger than their lies of truth. They couldn't twist. Marjorie Tate, my oldest friend, was the only one I let in on part of it. Marge, a retired teacher with a laugh that could fill a room, showed up one afternoon with a tray of her famous pecan bars. She took one look at my face and refused to leave until I told her something. I didn't give her the whole story, just enough to explain the shadows under my eyes. "You sure you know what you're doing, Nancy?" she asked, her voice low, her hand on mine. "I've never been more sure," I said. "They think I'm invisible. I'm going to show them I'm not." Marge didn't push. Instead, she helped me track down an old colleague of Lottie's, someone who'd worked with her on that marketing campaign gone wrong. The colleague confirmed the lawsuit, even sent me a copy of the court filing. Lottie's fraud wasn't just a rumor, it was a fact, one she'd buried under her polished smile and perfect pitches. When Paul told me about the engagement party, he did it over breakfast, his eyes on his toast. "Lottie wants it formal," he said, spreading butter like it was the most important task of the day. "It's in 3 weeks. She'd like you to be there." "Of course," I said, my voice soft, my smile just polite enough. That night, I called Vince again. "I need one more thing," I told him. "I want to make a statement, a moment they'll never forget." Vince connected me with a sound technician, a quiet man named Carl, who worked mostly on local theater productions. I gave him the recordings, along with a handwritten letter I'd crafted myself. It wasn't what it seemed, not an apology, not a surrender, but a trap. I told Carl exactly how I wanted the audio to play, timed to the second. He nodded, his face unreadable. "It'll be clean," he said. "Just give me the signal." The night before the party, I laid out my navy silk dress, the one Henry used to say made me look like I belonged in a painting. I polished my pearl earrings, the ones my mother gave me when I married Henry. I stood in front of the mirror, staring at my own face lined, yes, but still mine. "Tomorrow," I said to the quiet room. I stopped being silent. I wasn't just preparing for a party. I was preparing for a reckoning. The ballroom shimmered under the chandelier's soft glow, the white orchids catching flecks of light like stars. Glasses clinked, heels tapped against the polished floor, and laughter floated up to the ceiling. I sat at the head table, between Paul and Lottie, my navy silk dress smooth against my skin. My pearl earrings felt heavy, grounding me. I smiled the way a mother might on a night like this, but inside, I was coiled tight, ready. Lottie stood, her cream dress gleaming like it was woven from moonlight. She raised her champagne flute, her smile practiced. Perfect. Thank you all for being here, she began, her voice bright, like she was hosting a gala. We're so blessed to share this moment with our closest friends and family. The room quieted. She turned to me, her smile still in place, but her eyes were sharp, like they could cut glass. And a special thanks to Nancy, my future mother-in-law, she said, her tone dipping just enough to turn heads. She's shown such grace, stepping aside for our new life together. Not every woman her age would be so willing to let go. A few guests shifted in their seats, unsure. Mrs. Larson from the library glanced at me, her brow furrowed. Paul kept his eyes on his plate, his fork still. I didn't move. I folded my hands in my lap, my smile steady, and nodded once, slowly. 2 fresh starts. Lottie finished, raising her glass. The applause was thin, hesitant, like a breeze that couldn't decide its direction. I turned my head slightly and gave a single, deliberate nod to Carl, the sound technician, standing by the booth in the corner. Ladies and gentlemen, the event manager announced, his voice cutting through the murmur. Mrs. Wheeler has a few words to share in honor of the couple. A polite ripple of claps followed. Lottie's smile faltered, just for a moment, before she sat down, her posture stiff. Paul looked up, his eyes flickering with something confusion, maybe guilt. I stood, smoothing my dress, and pulled a folded piece of paper from my purse. The room went still. I wasn't going to speak tonight, I began, my voice calm, warm, like I was sharing a memory over coffee. But Lottie has been so open with her feelings, I thought it only fair to share something of my own. I unfolded the paper, holding it up for all to see. This is a letter from Lottie. She gave it to me yesterday, asking me to read it. Tonight, a gesture of peace, she said. Lottie's face froze. Her eyes darted to Paul, then back to me. There was no letter. She knew it. I knew it. But the room didn't. Dear Nancy, I read, my voice steady. I'm sorry for any misunderstandings between us. I want us to start fresh, as a family. You've been so kind to open your home to us, and I hope we can move forward together. The guests softened, some smiling, others nodding. Lottie's mouth opened, then closed, her hands gripping the edge of the table. I paused, letting the moment sink in, then folded the paper and set it down. Beautiful words, I said. But words can hide things, can't they? I nodded to Carl. The speakers hummed to life. Lottie's voice filled the room, clear and cold. We'll sell the house by spring. The furniture's worth 10 grand, easy. The antiques will cover the care home deposit. A gasp swept through the crowd. Mrs. Jenkins dropped her fork. Paul's face went pale, his hand reaching for Lottie's arm. Her voice continued. She doesn't check her mail. She's too busy dusting her relics. Paul's voice followed, hesitant. You sure she won't notice the loan? She won't know a thing until it's done, Lottie replied. Her laugh sharp through the speakers. The room was a sea of wide eyes and whispers. Lottie stood, her chair scraping the floor. This is a mistake, she stammered, her voice high. Turn it off. I placed a hand on Paul's sleeve, my touch light but firm. Sit, I said, my voice low, clear. You wanted this night to be unforgettable. The audio stopped, but I wasn't done. There's more, I said, turning to the guests. Lottie Hayes was sued 3 years ago for fraud. She falsified expenses on a marketing campaign, pocketing thousands from a client. The case was settled, but she was fired. Her reputation hangs by a thread. A murmur rippled through the room. Lottie's face drained of color. 2 men in suits, her business partners, I recognized, exchanged glances, their expressions hardening. For 38 years, I said, my voice steady, unshaken, I was a mother, a wife, a nurse, who gave everything to the people I loved. Tonight, I'm something else, a woman who refuses to be erased. Paul's eyes met mine, wide, stunned, like he was seeing me for the first time. I turned to Vince Porter, who stepped forward from the corner, a leather folder in his hands. This is Mr. Porter, I said, our family lawyer. He worked with my husband Henry for decades. He has something to share. Vince opened the folder, his voice calm but unyielding. We have verified documents proving Paul Wheeler committed mortgage fraud, forging his mother's signature on a $55,000 loan, using her home as collateral. We've also collected hours of audio showing a coordinated effort by Mr. Wheeler and Ms. Hayes to remove Mrs. Wheeler for financial gain. The bank has been notified, and legal steps are in place. He paused, then added, as of last month, Mrs. Wheeler's will has been revised. Paul Wheeler is no longer her heir. All assets, including the house, will go to a charity for children with autism. The room was silent, the kind of silence that feels heavier than sound. Paul stood, his hands shaking. "Mom, please," he said, his voice breaking. "Can we talk? Just us." "No," I said, meeting his eyes. "No more secrets. No more whispers. You're not my son anymore. You're a stranger living in my house." And in that moment, under the chandelier's glow, I turned and walked away from him, my steps steady, my heart lighter than it had been in months. The ballroom felt different after I walked away. The chandelier's glow seemed dimmer, the white orchids less pristine. Paul and Lottie left without a word, their steps hurried, like they were escaping a fire only they could see. The guests parted for them, silent, their faces a mix of shock and pity. No one followed. No one called after them. It was as if the room itself had drawn a line, and they'd crossed it alone. Vince Porter and I stayed until the last glass was cleared, until the whispers faded into the night. Mrs. Lawson from the library hugged me before she left, her arms warm and steady. Mr. Jenkins slipped a note into my hand, promising fresh tomatoes from his garden. Marjorie Tate Marge, my rock, stood by my side, her pecan bars untouched on the dessert table. "You did good, Nancy," she said, her voice soft but sure. "You did what you had to." I nodded, my throat too tight to answer. The days that followed felt like waking from a long, heavy dream. I called a locksmith the next morning, and by noon, the house had new locks, the kind that clicked with finality. Vince worked with the bank to cancel the fraudulent loan, every paper stamped and sealed. The evidence, the tin box, the recordings, the forged signature, was enough to close the case cleanly. Paul's name was scrubbed from everything, like a stain lifted from the fabric of my life. I stood in the dining room one afternoon, staring at the walls, their faded cream color suddenly too dull, too tired. I drove to the hardware store and came back with cans of pale yellow paint, the kind that catches the morning light like a promise. Marge came over with rollers and old jeans, and we painted the room together, laughing when we splattered each other's hair. The house felt different with that color, like it was breathing again, like it was mine. I started a pottery class at the community center, where women my age gathered to shape clay and share stories. Their hands, lined like mine, moved with purpose, and their laughter filled the gaps I hadn't realized were there. I made a small vase, lopsided but sturdy, and set it on the dining room table where the old flower vase used to sit. It held a single hydrangea from the backyard, its petals soft against the yellow walls. One quiet Tuesday, I packed a suitcase and took a bus to the Outer Banks. The ocean stretched wide and endless, its waves whispering secrets to the shore. I walked the beach each morning, a paperback tucked under my arm, letting the salt air untangle the knots in my chest. I joined a book club at a local cafe, where strangers welcomed me like I was someone worth knowing, not someone to be managed or moved aside. When I came home, the house felt lighter, empty in the best way. I cooked what I wanted: spicy chili, too much salt for Paul's taste. I played Henry's old jazz records, letting the saxophone fill the rooms. I sat by the window, watching the hydrangeas bloom, and remembered who I was before everything blurred into sacrifice. A letter arrived a few months later, Paul's handwriting careful on the envelope. I opened it in the dining room, the yellow walls bright around me. He wrote of regret, of mistakes, of wanting to talk. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." I read it once, then folded it and placed it in the wooden box where I kept Henry's old fishing lures. Forgiveness doesn't mean opening the door to pain again. It means choosing to walk forward. Unburdened, Marge came by one evening with paint swatches for the kitchen, her eyes sparkling with ideas. We sat on the porch, sipping tea, planning colors that felt like new beginnings. "You're not just surviving, Nancy," she said. "You're living," and she was right. I wasn't the woman who sat silent at that engagement party. I wasn't the mother who trusted too much, or the widow who held too tightly to the past. I was Nancy Wheeler, and I was free. If the person you love most betrays you, what do you do? Do you cling to the hurt, let it define you? Or do you choose yourself, your freedom, your worth? I learned something through all of this. Love doesn't mean giving everything until there's nothing left of you. It means knowing when to hold on and when to let go. It means building a life that's yours, no matter who tries to take it. Dignity isn't something anyone can steal, it's something you claim every day, with every step, and I'm still claiming mine.